Some games are fun for a weekend, others stay with you for the rest of your life. Today, we're talking about the single-player games that every gamer owes it to themselves to experience at least once before they die. This list is packed with unforgettable adventures, jaw-dropping moments, emotional roller coasters, and a few hot takes that might start a war in the comments. And trust me, some of the games near the end completely changed the way I look at gaming. The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt is one of those rare games that completely ruins your expectations for open-world RPGs. I went in thinking I was getting a cool fantasy adventure, and somehow ended up spending hours hunting monsters, playing cards with strangers, getting emotionally invested in random side characters, and making decisions that came back to haunt me dozens of hours later. What makes this game so special isn't just Geralt or the massive world. It's the fact that almost every quest feels like it actually matters. You'll start what looks like a simple monster contract and suddenly find yourself trapped in a dark, morally messy story where there isn't a clear right or wrong answer. And then there's the atmosphere. Riding through war-torn villages during a thunderstorm while that soundtrack kicks in is a gaming memory I'll never forget. Sure, the combat isn't perfect and can feel a little clunky compared to newer action RPGs, but honestly, the world, characters, storytelling, and pure sense of adventure make that easy to forgive. Even years later, very few games make exploration feel this rewarding. And somehow, the next game on this list delivers unforgettable moments in a completely different way. Red Dead Redemption 2 isn't just a game, it's one of the most believable virtual worlds ever created. The first thing that hit me wasn't the story, it was the details. The way Arthur slowly opens a drawer, the way mud sticks to your clothes after a fight, the way random strangers remember what happened the last time you crossed paths with them. Everything feels alive. I can't count how many times I set out to do a mission and got distracted for an hour because I saw smoke in the distance, stumbled onto a robbery, or found some weird mystery hidden deep in the wilderness. And then there's Arthur Morgan. What starts as a classic outlaw story slowly turns into one of the most emotional character journeys gaming has ever seen. By the end, I wasn't just playing as Arthur, I felt connected to him. The game is definitely slower than most modern action titles, and some players bounce off that pacing, but that's exactly why the emotional moments hit so hard. Rockstar gives you time to live in this world, and when things start falling apart, it genuinely hurts. There are scenes in this game that still live rent-free in my head years later. And if you think that's emotional, wait until you see the game coming up next, because it delivers unforgettable moments in a way almost nobody expected. God of War. Ragnarök somehow pulled off something I didn't think was possible. It took one of the most iconic action heroes in gaming and made me care more about his relationship with his son than the actual end of the world. The combat is absolutely brutal in the best way possible. Every axe throw feels satisfying, every shield bash hits like a truck, and some of the boss fights had me sitting forward in my chair like it was the final round of a championship match. But what really surprised me was how personal everything felt. Kratos isn't just fighting gods anymore. He's fighting his past, his fears, and the possibility of becoming the monster he used to be. One minute, you're battling creatures the size of buildings, and the next, you're caught in a quiet conversation that somehow hits harder than the action. The game isn't flawless. A few puzzles can overstay their welcome, and sometimes your companions are way too eager to give hints. But honestly, when the story starts firing on all cylinders, none of that matters. There were multiple moments where I just sat there after a cutscene thinking, did that really just happen? It's the kind of game that reminds you why single-player adventures can be so powerful. And trust me, the next game on this list takes immersion to a level that feels almost impossible. Elden Ring is the closest I've ever felt to being dropped into a world that genuinely doesn't care whether I succeed or fail. The moment I stepped out into the lands between, saw that massive golden tree in the distance, and immediately got destroyed by a boss I had absolutely no business fighting, I knew this game was different. Most games guide you from one objective to the next. Elden Ring basically shrugs and says, good luck. And somehow, that's exactly what makes it so addictive. Every hill, cave, castle, and creepy ruin feels like it might hide something incredible. 1 minute you're feeling unstoppable, and 5 minutes later some random enemy turns you into a statistic. But that's the magic. Every victory feels earned. I still remember finally defeating bosses that had been humiliating me for days and literally jumping out of my chair when they went down. The world is packed with secrets, weird characters, hidden areas, and jaw-dropping discoveries that constantly reward curiosity. It's not perfect. The difficulty can be intimidating, and some quests are so cryptic that you'll wonder if the developers were trolling us. But when everything clicks, there's nothing else quite like it. Few games capture that feeling of adventure and discovery this well. And somehow, the next game on this list delivers an experience that's just as unforgettable, but for completely different reasons. Cyberpunk 2077 is probably the biggest comeback story I've ever seen in gaming. I remember hearing all the controversy at launch, so I went in with pretty low expectations. Then Night City completely swallowed me whole. This world feels alive in a way that's hard to explain until you're actually walking through it. Neon lights everywhere, advertisements screaming at you from giant skyscrapers, random conversations happening on street corners, and this constant feeling that something interesting is waiting around the next block. But what surprised me most was how attached I became to the characters. Whether it was Johnny Silverhand living rent-free in my head, or the friends and allies I met along the way, these weren't just quest givers. They felt like real people with their own struggles and goals. The combat is also way more flexible than people give it credit for. One day I was sneaking through missions like a ghost, and the next I was hacking entire groups of enemies before they even knew I was there. And then there are those story moments. The kind that make you stare at the screen after a mission ends because you're still processing what just happened. Sure, there are still occasional rough edges, and no game this ambitious is completely flawless. But the version we have today is something special. It's stylish, emotional, chaotic, and surprisingly human beneath all the chrome and technology. And if you think Night City knows how to leave a lasting impression, wait until you see the next game, because it delivers one of the most unforgettable journeys gaming has ever created. Ghost of Tsushima made me feel like I was starring in my own samurai movie from the very first minute. The crazy part is that it doesn't rely on endless map markers or constant distractions to pull you in. Instead, it lets the world guide you naturally. You're following the wind across golden fields, chasing foxes through forests, and stumbling onto beautiful locations that make you stop for a second just to take everything in. And then there's the combat. Every sword fight feels fast, precise, and incredibly satisfying. Some battles only last a few seconds, but the tension makes them feel unforgettable. I still remember walking into standoffs, staring down a group of enemies, and feeling like the coolest person alive when I landed that first perfect strike. But beneath all the action is a surprisingly emotional story about honor, sacrifice, and what happens when doing the right thing isn't so simple anymore. Jin's journey kept pulling me forward because every victory seemed to come with a cost. The game can get a little repetitive if you try to clear every icon on the map, but honestly, when the world looks this gorgeous and the combat feels this good, I never minded spending extra time in it. Few games manage to be this relaxing, this intense, and this emotional all at once. And trust me, the next game on this list takes storytelling in a direction that nobody saw coming and delivers moments that still spark debates years later. The Last of Us Part 1 is one of those games that grabs you in the opening minutes and never really lets go. I knew it had a great reputation before I played it, but nothing prepared me for how invested I'd become in Joel and Ellie's journey. What starts as a survival story quickly turns into something much deeper. Every conversation, every quiet moment while exploring abandoned buildings, and every desperate fight against infected feels meaningful because you're not just trying to survive. You're watching two broken people slowly build a connection in a world that has lost almost everything. The gameplay isn't about making you feel like a superhero. Resources are scarce, ammunition is precious, and every encounter can go wrong in seconds. That constant tension kept me on edge the entire time. One mistake could turn a simple encounter into pure chaos, and those moments created some of the most intense memories I've ever had in a single-player game. But the real reason this game stays with people is the storytelling. There are scenes, conversations, and decisions that hit so hard because they feel human. Not perfect, not clean, just real. Even now, years later, people still debate the ending because it refuses to give easy answers. That's incredibly rare in gaming. And somehow, the next game on this list delivers a completely different kind of masterpiece, one that proves incredible storytelling doesn't always need giant cutscenes or endless dialogue to leave a permanent mark on you.
Fresh air.
Kingdom Come. Deliverance 2 feels like the kind of RPG that almost doesn't exist anymore. From the moment I jumped into Henry's latest adventure, it was obvious this game wasn't interested in making me feel like an all-powerful hero. It wanted me to earn everything. Every sword fight, every conversation, every risky decision felt like it had real weight behind it. What I love most is how immersive the world is. You're not just running from objective marker to objective marker. You're living in medieval Europe, dealing with political drama, dangerous roads, suspicious strangers, and situations that can spiral completely out of control when you least expect it. Some of my favorite moments weren't even part of the main story. They came from random encounters, failed plans, and hilarious mistakes that somehow turned into unforgettable adventures. The combat can be challenging, especially if you're expecting a simple hack-and-slash experience, but once it clicks, every victory feels incredibly satisfying, and the attention to detail is honestly ridiculous. Characters react to what you're wearing, your reputation matters, and the world constantly makes you feel like your actions have consequences. It's not the fastest-paced RPG on this list, and that slower approach won't be for everyone, but for players who love getting completely lost in a believable world, it's something special. The best part is that it takes everything fans loved about the original and pushes it even further. And trust me, the next game proves that sometimes a game doesn't need massive cities or endless dialogue to create one of the most unforgettable adventures you'll ever experience.
Good.
Black Myth. Wukong instantly reminded me why first impressions matter in gaming. The moment I saw those incredible environments, insanely detailed bosses, and smooth combat animations, I knew I was looking at something special. But what surprised me most was that it isn't just a pretty game showing off fancy graphics. The combat has real depth. Every boss felt like a test of patience, timing, and adaptation. There were fights where I got absolutely destroyed over and over again, and then that one perfect attempt finally came together and felt amazing. Those victories hit differently because the game makes you earn them. What really stuck with me, though, was the atmosphere. The world is packed with strange creatures, fascinating mythology, and locations that constantly made me wonder what was waiting around the next corner. Even when I thought I understood a boss's attack pattern, the game would throw something unexpected at me and completely change the fight. Not every section is flawless. A few progression moments can feel a little confusing, and some encounters are definitely tougher than they need to be. But when Black Myth, Wukong is at its best, it delivers the kind of jaw-dropping moments that remind you why we love single-player games in the first place. It's beautiful, challenging, mysterious, and packed with memorable battles that stay in your head long after you've put down the controller. And somehow, the next game on this list manages to create unforgettable memories without relying on giant boss fights at all, proving that pure creativity can be just as powerful as spectacle. Horizon Forbidden West is one of those games that constantly made me stop and say, okay, that looks incredible. The world is absolutely stunning, but what kept me hooked wasn't just the visuals. It was the feeling of exploring a future where nature has reclaimed the planet while giant machine creatures roam the landscape like mechanical dinosaurs. The first time I took down one of those massive machines, carefully targeting its weak points while desperately trying not to get flattened, I knew this wasn't going to be a typical open-world adventure. Every fight feels like a puzzle mixed with an action movie. You can't just run in swinging and hope for the best. You have to study enemies, use the right tools, and adapt when everything goes wrong. Aloy is also one of my favorite protagonists in modern gaming because she's smart, determined, and constantly pushing forward even when the odds seem impossible. The story has some wild sci-fi twists that kept surprising me, and the world building is so detailed that I found myself reading lore entries I would normally ignore in other games. Sure, the map is packed with activities and can feel a little overwhelming at times, but there's always something interesting to discover. Whether I was gliding over mountains, diving into underwater ruins, or battling machines the size of buildings, the game kept finding new ways to impress me. And trust me, the next game on this list goes in the exact opposite direction, trading giant open-world spectacle for one of the most emotional and unforgettable stories gaming has ever delivered. Resident Evil 4 Remake is proof that a remake can feel fresh, even when it's based on one of the most legendary games ever made. I expected great action and scary moments, but I didn't expect to have this much fun from start to finish. The game constantly keeps you on edge. One minute you're feeling confident with a fully upgraded weapon, and the next you're trapped in a village surrounded by enemies coming from every direction. That opening village fight alone is still one of the most intense sequences I've played in years. What makes the game so addictive is how perfectly it balances horror and action. It's scary enough to make you nervous when entering a dark room, but it's also packed with explosive moments that make you feel like an absolute badass. Leon feels better than ever. The weapons are incredibly satisfying, and every encounter feels carefully designed to keep the pressure on. I also love how the remake updates the story and characters without losing the charm that made the original so memorable. There are moments that made me laugh, moments that genuinely stressed me out, and a few sections that had me checking every corner before moving forward. Not every boss is a masterpiece, and a couple of sections can drag slightly compared to the game's strongest moments, but overall, this is one of the most polished action horror experiences ever made. It's the kind of game that grabs hold of you and refuses to let go until the credits roll. And somehow, the next game on this list takes a completely different approach to immersion, creating a world so rich and reactive that it feels less like a game and more like another life. Sekiro. Shadows. Die Twice is the game that humbled me more times than I can count. I went in thinking my experience with action games would carry me, and Sekiro basically laughed at that idea. This is not a game where you spam attacks and hope for the best. It forces you to learn, to adapt, and to actually get good in a way that feels almost surgical. Every fight is about timing, patience, and reading your enemy like a book that keeps changing pages mid-sentence. The first time I properly nailed a perfect deflect chain against a boss, it felt like I had unlocked a completely new level of focus. And when it clicks, there's nothing else like it. You stop panicking and start dancing through attacks like everything is happening in slow motion. But I won't lie, this game can be brutal. There were moments where I got stuck on a single boss for hours, questioning all my life choices. And yet, I kept coming back, because every loss felt like it was teaching me something. The world itself is darker and more mysterious than most From Software games, with this haunting version of feudal Japan that feels beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Even small victories, like finally clearing a tough area, feel massive here. It's not just about beating enemies, it's about breaking through your own limits. And just when you think you've seen what peak combat challenge looks like, the next game on this list goes in a totally different direction, focusing less on punishment and more on pure storytelling power that hits you right in the emotions. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is the kind of game that makes you feel like you're having fun within the first 5 minutes and never really lets that feeling drop. The moment I swung through New York again, switching between Peter and Miles, it just felt smooth in a way that's honestly hard to explain until you're doing it yourself. Movement in this game is pure joy. You're not thinking about mechanics, you're just flying between buildings, diving through traffic, and pulling off swings that make you feel way cooler than you actually are. What really surprised me was how the story balances everything. You've got Peter dealing with responsibility and pressure, Miles trying to figure out his place, and then the whole Venom situation just slowly turning everything upside down. There are moments where the game goes from light and fun to serious and intense really fast, and that shift actually works way better than I expected. Some boss fights feel like full-on cinematic set pieces where you're barely keeping up, and that chaos just adds to it. It's not perfect though. A few missions can feel a bit too scripted, and sometimes the game takes control away a little more than I'd like. But honestly, when you're swinging through the city at sunset or pulling off a perfect combat combo in the middle of a street fight, it's hard to care about those small issues. And the crazy part is, the next game on this list takes a completely different approach. No superheroes, no giant set pieces, just pure psychological tension that stays with you long after you stop playing.
You're a lifesaver. Thank you.
Baldur's Gate 3 is one of those rare games where I kept thinking, there's no way they actually let me do that. And then the game just quietly says, yeah, you can. Every decision feels like it opens 10 more possibilities I didn't even consider. I remember one moment where I thought I was solving a situation the normal way, and the game basically rewarded me for thinking completely outside the box instead. That kind of freedom is wild. What makes it even better is how alive the world feels. Every companion has their own personality, their own problems, and their own opinions about everything you do. Sometimes they agree with you, sometimes they judge you hard, and sometimes they just straight up leave you wondering if you made the worst decision possible. And I actually loved that. It makes every choice feel real. The turn-based combat sounds slow on paper, but in practice, it turns into these insane moments where a fight can go from controlled to absolute chaos in seconds. One bad move, one missed spell, and suddenly everything is on fire and you're just trying to survive. But when your plan actually works, it feels incredible. It's not a perfect game for everyone. The learning curve is real, and some of the systems can feel overwhelming if you're new to this style, but if it clicks, it's one of the most rewarding RPG experiences ever made. And the next game on this list takes things in a very different direction again, focusing less on choice and more on pure emotional storytelling that hits way harder than you expect. Death Stranding is one of the strangest games I've ever played, and I mean that in the best way possible. On paper, it sounds simple. You're just delivering packages across a broken world. But the moment you actually start walking through that landscape, it turns into something way deeper than that. Every step matters. You're not rushing into fights every 5 seconds. You're planning your route, balancing your load, watching your footing, and trying not to wipe out on a random slope that looks harmless, but absolutely isn't. And somehow, that slow pace starts to feel intense in its own way. You're alone for long stretches, just you, the terrain, and this haunting silence that makes everything feel heavier. But what really surprised me is how emotional it gets. The story is weird, complex, and honestly a bit confusing at times, but it keeps pulling you forward with these powerful moments and characters that stick in your head. And then there's the whole idea of connecting people. Even when you're alone, you're not really alone because other players are building bridges, roads, and helping you without ever meeting you. That system hits harder than I expected. It's definitely not a game for everyone. Some people will bounce off it fast because of the pacing. But if you let it breathe, it turns into this unique experience that you genuinely can't get anywhere else. And the next game takes everything we just talked about, but flips it into pure sci-fi chaos with one of the most mind-bending stories in modern gaming. Control is one of those games that makes you feel like reality is constantly glitching in the best possible way. The moment I stepped into the oldest house, I had no idea what was going on, and honestly, that confusion is part of the experience. This place is alive in a weird, unsettling way, shifting and changing while you're trying to make sense of what's even real. What really hooked me is the combat. You start off feeling kind of weak, just a normal person with a gun, and then slowly you unlock these insane abilities that turn every fight into total chaos. Throwing office objects at enemies, levitating through destroyed rooms, and watching everything explode into particles feels ridiculously satisfying. It goes from, I'm barely surviving, to I am the danger in this building, pretty fast. The story is strange, mysterious, and sometimes straight up confusing, but it keeps pulling you deeper into its world. You're constantly finding documents, recordings, and weird details that make you question what's actually happening. It doesn't explain everything, and that actually makes it more interesting. It's not a game you play for straightforward answers. It's a game you play for atmosphere, mystery, and those moments where everything clicks just enough to keep you hooked. And the next game on this list takes a completely different route again, focusing less on chaos and more on a grounded, emotional story that builds slowly but hits really hard by the end. Hades is one of those games that looks simple at first and then completely takes over your life before you even realize it. I remember thinking, okay, it's just a dungeon runner, I'll play for like 20 minutes. Yeah, that did not happen. Every run pulls you deeper, and even when you lose, you still feel like you're making progress. What really makes Hades special is how alive everything feels. Every time you come back to the House of Hades, the characters actually react to what you did. They remember your failures, your victories, and even the random choices you made during runs. It makes the whole loop feel personal, like the game is growing with you instead of just repeating itself. And the combat is just ridiculously smooth. You start off scrambling to survive, dodging everything like your life depends on it, and then slowly you start piecing together builds that make you feel unstoppable. One run you're barely surviving, and the next you're melting bosses like it's nothing. That constant push and pull is what keeps you addicted. It's fast, it's stylish, and it somehow turns failure into motivation instead of frustration. Even when you die, you're still learning something, unlocking something, or seeing new story moments that keep you invested. And the next game on this list takes that addictive loop feeling and flips it into something way more grounded, emotional, and surprisingly realistic in a way most games don't even attempt. Disco Elysium is not really a game you play in the normal sense. It's more like stepping into someone else's broken mind and trying to piece reality together while everything around you feels unstable. The first thing that hit me wasn't action or combat. It was how much dialogue actually matters here. Every conversation feels like a battle of ideas, not weapons. You wake up as a detective with no memory, and instead of giving you clear answers, the game just lets you spiral. Your thoughts argue with each other, your skills talk back to you, and sometimes your own brain straight up sabotages you in the middle of important moments. It's weird, but in a way that feels intentional and kind of brilliant. What surprised me most is how deep the writing goes. You can fail a check and still get an unforgettable scene. You can succeed and still feel like you made things worse. There's no perfect path, just consequences that keep stacking on top of each other. And honestly, that's what makes it so memorable. It's slow, it's text-heavy, and it definitely won't be for everyone. But if it clicks, it feels less like playing a game and more like reading a living, breathing psychological novel where you actually control how the story bends. And the next game on this list takes us back into pure action again, but this time with a level of polish and intensity that feels almost cinematic every single second.
Put some more coffee on, Uli. We've got a long night ahead of us. We should probably get Cindy in here too. Oh, and Gendarme. One last thing. About that question you asked earlier. It reminded me of a certain poem that you might...
Ori and the Will of the Wisps is one of those games that looks beautiful in screenshots, but hits completely different when you're actually playing it. From the very beginning, it feels like you're inside a moving painting. The animation, the lighting, the music, everything is just working together in a way that constantly pulls you in emotionally. But what really surprised me is how responsive the movement feels. You start off a little fragile, but as you unlock abilities, Ori turns into this fast, flowing force of nature. You're dashing, climbing, gliding, and chaining movement in a way that feels almost musical. When it clicks, it's pure rhythm. You're not just controlling a character anymore, you're flowing through the world, and then there's the emotional side of it. This game doesn't try to be loud about its story, but it still manages to hit hard. There were moments where I just paused for a second because the atmosphere, the music, and what was happening on screen all came together in a way that felt heavier than I expected from a platformer. It's not perfect though. Some sections can get really tough, and if you miss a jump or mistime something, it can be a bit frustrating. But the game is so smooth overall that even the failures feel like part of the rhythm. And the next game on this list takes us into a completely different kind of challenge again, one that focuses less on speed and more on atmosphere, survival, and psychological tension that slowly gets under your skin. Mass Effect Legendary Edition is basically 3 massive sci-fi journeys packed into one experience, and the wild part is how quickly it pulls you into its universe. From the moment I became Shepard, it didn't feel like I was just following a story. It felt like I was building one. Every decision, every dialogue choice, every squad member I brought along actually mattered in a way that kept stacking across all 3 games. What really stuck with me is the squad. These characters don't just fight with you, they grow with you. You talk to them between missions, you learn their stories, and over time it starts to feel like you're not just leading a team, you're responsible for them. And when things go wrong, it actually hits hard because of that connection. The combat improves with each game, but honestly, it's the story that carries everything. Massive galactic wars, impossible choices, and moments where there is no perfect answer, just the one you can live with. Some decisions genuinely stay with you long after you're done playing. It's not flawless. The first game definitely feels older in its gameplay, and a few mechanics show their age. But as a full trilogy experience, it's still one of the most complete and emotional journeys in gaming. And now we've reached the end of this list. There's something special about games like these. They're not just entertainment. They're experiences that stay in your head long after you turn the console off. Some made us emotional, some tested our patience, and some just made us sit there in silence after the credits rolled. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Now I want to know from you, which game on this list hit you the hardest, and which one do you think I should have added? If you enjoyed this video, drop a like, subscribe for more gaming content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.